One of the most important ways for our community to get a sense of its own character, in particular, is to study its own history. And Ripon has been unusually fortunate in that regard, in that there have been two men who played a major role in helping us recall our history. The first of these was Sam Pedrick. Pedrick was one of 9 men who founded the Ripon Historical Society in 1899, making it then the second local historical society founded in the state, and with number 1 having collapsed shortly afterwards, Ripon Historical Society is now the oldest historical society in the state. So that in some respects, Pedrick, who was during his lifetime often referred to as Mr. History, George Miller became sort of Mr. History. And between the two of these men, our heritage has been preserved, and I think the community owes a great deal of debt to these two men for preserving our sense of our own historic identity.
Ripon, Wisconsin, a small city with a big history. Ripon is truly a unique community thanks to its historical origins, which have profoundly shaped its character.
I think we can get at that character by looking at two of the stories associated with the founding of the town. The town was founded from 2 different sources. One was a group of idealists from Racine who were following what we call socialist or utopian socialist doctrine based on communal living and communal sharing of work. And we're looking for a way to make this work and to demonstrate to the world the validity of their vision. So to do that, they created a company, sold shares in a good capitalist fashion, and came to Ripon, 19 of them with one boy, to found their community, which they called Ceresco, indicating, of course, that they thought the future of Ripon lay in wheat. And Ceresco, of course, being the goddess of agriculture, indicated this future in wheat. They then built their long house, a single long dwelling, 2 stories, people living in own bedrooms upstairs but eating communally downstairs, to demonstrate this communal idea that they wanted to show to the world. So we had, on the one hand, a group of active but idealistic settlers.
The Ceresco community in Ripon lasted 4 years. That may seem like a very short period of time, but it was the longest lasting voyeuristic community in the United States. It probably did not last for a variety of reasons. The primary one was that they never quite got enough settlers to make it go. Another reason was that they got an overabundance of single men joining the community as opposed to families, and that caused quite a bit of friction because they were supposed to be having meals communally, domestic duties were supposed to be done communally, and the women of Ceresco were upset that they were essentially doing laundry and food preparation and so on for people other than their husbands. So when it broke up in 1848, it broke up very amicably. The land was distributed among the people that were still at Ceresco, and many of those people remained in the area and became upright citizens of the Ripon community, even though Ceresco was disbanded.
So the other was David Mapes in the late 1840s, who came to Ripon with his 2 sons and saw as the Ceresco settlers saw, that the land was good for wheat, and decided to set his community up here. It had a nice creek running by that could be used for grist mills. And he made a deal with the owner of the land, John Horner, in which he would develop the land and they would share in the profits. So, of course, the first 2 buildings that went up was a hotel and a grist mill. Ripon was ideally situated, of course, because if you landed in Sheboygan as a settler and wanted to go west, you would, of course, pass through Ripon. Therefore, the hotel would be a place where you would stay. Mapes would be there, and he greeted the people, chatted with them, and decided during the conversation whether these are people he'd like to have settle in the town. So that not only did Mapes settle this community, but he handpicked the settlers that he wanted as aggressive entrepreneurial types.
Part of the deal that Horner made with Mapes was that Mapes would build a mill on Silver Creek, and then he would build a hotel. And the site chosen for the hotel was about where the city building is today at the end of the square. And the reason for the mill, of course, is fairly obvious. The farmers needed a place to have their grain turned into flour. And the reason for the hotel is that it would be the headquarters for the promotion of the village. And as people came through this area, they would stop at the hotel either for lodging or for food, and this would give Mapes a chance to talk to them. And if he liked their looks, why, he'd encourage them to stay. And he might even offer them a lot downtown if they wanted to start a bank. And in fact, this is the sort of thing that he did. And if he didn't like their looks, why, he'd tell them about something that was happening further west and encourage them to go on. And it seems to have worked.
In 1851, Mapes and several others founded Ripon College as a means of attracting desirable citizens.
Ripon, of course, is distinct in that it has a nationally recognized quality liberal arts college in its midst, and that college has been here for a long time. It was, in fact, one of the very first acts of the founding of this town, thinking that it might be useful in terms of real estate values to have a college or lyceum, as they called it then, located in the town. The town fathers appropriated the money set aside for setting up a primary school and built a college instead. Since then, there has been a kind of unique, almost unique, and symbiotic relationship between the town and the college. Unlike most towns with colleges, town-gown relationships in Ripon have always been very, very close and warm. This was from the very beginning. We have a letter at the Historical Society from a woman who lived here, recalling the early days of the town and the college. And she remarked that she would take her daughter down and watch the farmers hauling logs and timber in to the sawmill to be used in the building of the college. It was a college in some respects built by the very citizens of the town, many of whom could contribute only $5 or a team load of lumber for it. For a long time, most of the trustees in the college came from the town, from the citizens of the town. Later, before we got dormitories, the students lived with the citizens in town. We have another letter from a community citizen to his daughter, who was sad by the fact that 4 of the 8 students who lived in his home wouldn't be coming back that year. So there was not only, in a certain sense, the willingness of the citizens to host our students, but also a certain personal, almost familial relationship with them.
I think what makes Ripon really special and why we feel so privileged to be here is Ripon College. We have wonderful arts, we have great speakers, we have athletics, and we have the advantage of living and working with faculty, staff, and students. That makes Ripon very, very important.
So Ripon was founded by a kind of combination of idealists who were searching for a great utopian goal and highly pragmatists. One of the people who exemplify what I'm talking about is Carrie Chapman Catt, who was born in Ripon and became a leader in the women's suffrage movement. She, in fact, became the leader after Susan B. Anthony retired. Under Catt's administration, the emphasis of the movement changed. Instead of being kind of leading protests and stressing the idealism, Carrie Chapman Catt became very pragmatic and said, what do we need to do politically to get suffrage passed. And she did what was necessary politically to get suffrage passed. A move for which she is sometimes criticized by other women for, in some respects, losing the idealism of the movement. But nevertheless, the Women's Suffrage Act passed, 19th Amendment, and after which, of course, she founded the League of Women Voters, knowing that it's not merely enough that women have the right to vote, but they should also inform themselves of the issues of the day. So I think Carrie Chapman Catt demonstrates this kind of Ripon commitment to what you might call pragmatic idealism and active participation in society. That combination of pragmatic idealism explains in part what happened in 1854 and what is part of the character of the town ever since.
There was a person living in Ripon at that time called Alvin Beauvais. And Beauvais, who came here from New York, was really opposed to spreading slavery. He got a bunch of people together. They met in this building in 1854, and they decided to create an organization which would resist the spread of slavery in our country, and they called themselves Republicans. And that's how the Republican Party got started here.
The critical figure in Ripon in forming the Republican Party was a man named Alvin Beauvais. Beauvais was from New York. He came to Ripon in 1850 as a land developer. He was part of the pragmatic side of the community, but also highly idealistic. He believed in many of the causes that had troubled the people in New York. He was a strong supporter of the Homestead Act and others, and it was, of course, very much opposed to the extension of slavery into the territories and even to slavery itself. He was a highly active person, and when he came to Ripon, soon became a leader there.
Then Beauvais comes out here and settles in Ripon, becomes a lawyer. And when the Kansas-Nebraska Act is introduced into the Senate, then he says, well, okay, now is the time. And so he began to agitate for a new national party here in the city of Ripon, a city of, just a couple of hundred people probably at this time, which certainly isn't going to cause very much concern throughout the nation. But you got to start somewhere. And he thought that if he could get things started here in Ripon, then maybe he could convince Greeley, and Greeley would come out in favor of a new party called Republican.
The other thing he said was, we get a lot of immigrants coming to America, and Republican's a word that everybody can understand. It's Republikaner in German, it's Republicano in Italian and Spanish, and he went on and on and on, really pushing the name Republican.
Beauvais suggested that name. They adopted it in Ripon. He suggested it to Horace Greeley in a letter he wrote to him on June 12th. On June 24th, Horace Greeley came out with an editorial in which he suggested he thought that Republican would be a nice name for the party, giving no credit to anyone else. But in any case, Beauvais claims to have suggested the name.
And Greeley kept saying, you might be right, but this isn't going to happen top down. I, as a Whig leader, can't come out and say, let's get rid of the Whig Party. He said that's going to have to be a grassroots movement, which eventually it was. I mean, the importance of the founding of the Republican Party is eventually that it did come from the grassroots rather than from established Whig or Democrat or Free Soil leaders. So that this party started really quickly from the grassroots and spread outward to the national scene in a really impressively rapid situation. I think that's the really important part about the birth of it. The founding of the Republican Party was a very important part of Ripon's history, remains a very important part of Ripon's history, and this building is a tangible example of that. I would say one other thing too, which may sound obvious, it is a schoolhouse. And schools have always played a very important role in American democracy, particularly frontier democracy. Schools and education have always been important in American history as a way that people could get ahead. So I think that there has been, maybe even subconsciously, a real importance to the fact that a schoolhouse is an important symbol for a community, as well as the fact that it happened to be the place where a political party was formed.
And this notion that we can get together, that groups of people who differ from each other on many occasions could get together and solve a problem, I think is an extraordinarily healthy attitude. I think it's one of the things that makes Ripon work. I think it's part of our character today, and it's one of the reason for the schoolhouse, I think, is that it should remind us of the fact that a small group of people who may differ on many things can get together and make changes.
In 1929, Ripon marked the 75th anniversary of the founding of the Republican Party with a gala celebration.
The 75th anniversary was by far the most successful. We had 10,000 people come. The Secretary of War came to give a speech. The 1954 celebration was for the 100th anniversary of the party. It was a less grand affair, the highlight of which was the creation of an eternal flame that was going to be put in a round circle, fire circle outside the little white schoolhouse. The eternal flame was lit by President Dwight Eisenhower by telephone from his office. He clicked a button, which I guess clicked an electric spark that set off the flame. 2004, we had the 150th celebration, which was a very small affair. Interestingly enough, about more than half of the people on the planning committee were Democrats. It was a local affair. We had former Governor Dreyfus come to speak at a dinner, which was mostly a fundraiser to help raise money to support the restoration of the little white schoolhouse.
On August 11, 1974, the United States Department of Interior announced that Ripon's Little White Schoolhouse, which illustrates the spontaneous and widespread grassroots origins of the Republican Party, would henceforth be designated as a national landmark. The last 3 decades of the 19th century brought many changes as the city continued to grow and prosper. New settlers built new churches and schools, and in many cases bought the farms and businesses of Yankee families who moved on further west. The arrival of these new groups coincided with a period of economic adjustment. Originally geared to the needs of wheat farmers, the business community of Ripon had to recognize that wheat farming was giving way to dairying and more diversified agriculture. Because it had become an important railroad junction by 1870, Ripon was able to make the adjustment with comparative ease. Flour milling did not disappear completely, but it was replaced in good measure by canning and other forms of food processing. A brewery and knitting works were among the larger establishments of this sort. But smaller shops manufactured gloves and hosiery, carriages and wagons, saddles and harness equipment, windmills, barrels, pickles, cigars, toys, organs, and pianos. From about 1870 to 1910, the frontier village transformed itself into a small city. The population grew from about 2,000 in 1860 to around 4,000 in 1890, and then leveled off, remaining at 4,000 until 1940. Downtown Ripon took on a more permanent look as paved streets and sidewalks replaced boardwalks and mud or slush-filled streets. The Ripon Historical Society, founded in 1899, began to collect and preserve the records of the city's heritage. Ripon emerged in the early decades of the 20th century as a stable yet vigorous community with a good economic balance and unusual cultural and recreational opportunities. This was due partly to the presence of the college and partly to the closeness of a major summer resort at Green Lake, but also to the unspoiled character of its natural surroundings. Ripon has retained many of these advantages to the present day. It has been able to preserve its economic, social, and cultural balance through periods of prosperity and depression.
I think that was the hub of Ripon because of the scale. It was the largest section of downtown. And it also had, of course, the movie theater, which was the major entertainment venue in Ripon, probably still is.
But even long before Tim Like and his family came to Ripon, the square was a place of necessity for the people of Ripon. More than a century earlier, in the early 1850s, the first building on Ripon Square, a hardware store, was erected. Next came a couple of grocery stores and a jewelry store. There was also the addition of a small restaurant where locals could dine. By 1875, a drugstore and the First National Bank opened their doors. The businesses brought more people to town, and as Ripon became more popular and found more publicity, along came the railroad line and hotels, most notably the Grandview Hotel. By the early 1900s, business was booming, and Ripon's growth continued on a steady pace for the next couple of decades. The square was quickly becoming the place to be in downtown Ripon. One of the signature buildings on the square was built in the first half of the 1930s, and on November 1st, 1935, Ben Marcus opened the first Marcus Cinema Theater right on the square in downtown Ripon. Of course, the building still remains today and has been the site for endless memories for many generations through the years. The Grandview Hotel was located on the north end of the square, where the Ripon City Building sits today. The hotel was Ripon's signature building. Then, on a cold, cold winter night, February 1st, 1949, tragedy struck. And by morning, the Grandview was gone, and 6 people had perished.
The event that I recall most vividly certainly would be Maxwell Street days. And saving our money, and maybe Mom would give us an extra $1 or $2, and we'd come downtown and be very careful about how we were going to spend that money. But you'd look over everything, and then you'd maybe blow a little bit of it on a game that maybe the JCs were running. You'd try to flip those rings on the bottles, or we'd throw a ping pong ball and get ourselves a goldfish and then bring them home, and they'd die about 6 hours later. But Maxwell Street days was a real treat, and we just couldn't wait to wake up and get down to Maxwell Street days.
that's clear and blue.
Chairman, on your mark. Get set. Go. Oh, and we have a winner. The Bears.
He's got tennis shoes. That's no fair.
And Fame fell down.
We're gonna have a good time. This is the concerts on the green here in Ripon tonight. We're gonna have a good time. Good clapping already. Let's get it going. Take it home.
You're okay. You're fine. You're fine.
Man, walks down the street now. Finding myself in the middle. Finding myself in the middle. Cause my life is so hard.
And we'll try. Oh Lord, we'll try to carry on.
Ripon's architectural record is unusually rich and diverse.
Ripon faces a real challenge maintaining our own identity and our own sense of our own distinctiveness. We have done this in part by trying to preserve the unusual historic character of our downtown architecture, probably one of the most historic downtown architectures in the state of Wisconsin and perhaps in the country.
Several buildings have been placed on the National Register of Historic Places. State Historical Society markers proclaim the significance of Ceresco, the Little White Schoolhouse, Ripon College, and the birthplace of Carrie Chapman Catt, noted leader of the movement for women's rights.
Ripon has a long history of newspapering. We have had many what we call banners or flags, titles of newspapers in this town, probably more than 50, including one in German. So it's been a big newspaper town, and it's had multiple titles at the same time. But for many years it was the Ripon Commonwealth and the Weekly Press until the late 1950s when they combined to become the Ripon Commonwealth Press. And my family got involved in 1962 when my father, who was a public relations executive in Chicago, working on the Loop right downtown, with the help of his parents and my mother, bought the newspaper. And then they made the mistake of buying a fast press because they had excess press time. They suddenly became a commercial printer. And hence, Ripon Printers was born of the decision to buy a community web press for the newspaper. I got involved in 1990 because my dad called me in Minnesota where I was an editor of a newspaper, and he said, if you want to come back to run the newspaper, this would be the time, because you either come back now or I'm going to sell it, because at that time he was publishing a newspaper and a shopping guide and running a commercial printing company all by himself. And so I looked at my wife and I said, we'll never have this opportunity again, not knowing what I didn't know, which was a good thing because I didn't know a whole lot. But we came back to Ripon and haven't looked back. We really enjoyed it. We've seen a lot of evolution of the newspaper in the short time, well, short time being 24 years that I've been here. The most significant probably being the change in technology, as it is everywhere else. In our case, of course, we can now set our newspaper digitally and send it right to plate. But from a journalist standpoint, the biggest change is that we don't have to spend hours and hours in a darkroom. With digital photography, we can take as many images we want, we can upload them, choose the ones we want, create video, put it online, send people to our website via Facebook. It's allowed us to spend less time making and more time thinking about how we're going to present graphically and in words, of course, our stories to our readers. The biggest stories, I think, off the top of my head, I could think of two. One was the abduction and subsequent killing of an 11-year-old named Ronnie Eichstead in the early 1990s. And I think with that, Ripon performed heroically in that people came out to search for Ronnie. Most of us didn't know of her, but she was one of our own, and so we felt like she was our daughter. And so people went out to look for her. Certainly those who were familiar with the family comforted them and asked to help in any way they could. Literally people linked hands, I think, from downtown at one point down West Fond du Lac Street. I don't know how far they went, but it was a showing of solidarity for the family. But when we found out what happened to Ronnie, I think a little bit of Ripon's innocence went away. We realized that this world out there that we heard of where cruel things happen to people happened to one of our own. And that plus abduction and killing of a trick-or-treater in Fond du Lac, Lisa French, I think her name was, which was not a Ripon story, but because that was close to Ripon, things changed. No more trick-or-treating at night. No more letting your child walk by him or herself on the sidewalk and not worry about where they are. Things, you know, we tended to lock our doors. Things like that changed. The other story that, again, off the top of my head, is our decision as a city to become involved with a Milwaukee attorney, a development company called Boca Grande, LLC, Limited Liability Corporation, in hopes of transforming downtown into a greater tourist destination and heightening underused properties. It was a good idea on paper. It was, for whatever reason, poorly executed. There are disputes as to why that happened, and it's in litigation right now as to whether or not there was interference with the developer or the developer's dreams, as noble as they were unrealistic. I think it's made us a smarter city, and it also probably has caused us collectively to realize we really have a pretty darn good downtown. And while it can be better, and we can shoot for the stars, we're pretty happy where we are. And particularly when you look at other neighboring communities, we're doing okay.
In the last 25 years, there has been a considerable movement of Ripon businesses out to an outside strip on Highway 23 towards Green Lake. This has changed the character of Main Street. And Main Street used to have all the businesses necessary to sustain life: grocery stores, hardware stores, five and dime stores, those things. Those have all disappeared, going out to areas where there's greater parking, which is offered by the strip.
I think the thing that's most noticeable to me as I compare the early 70s and right now is that when we first moved here, just about everything that you needed came from downtown. There was no west side. Trips to Oshkosh and Fond du Lac were really rare. And what we needed was available downtown, and it was primarily focused on meeting basic needs. There were grocery stores, drugstore, the hardware stores, the banks, the dentist office upstairs from the bank. All of those things were things that you needed as everyday kinds of basic things. Some of those things are still downtown, but the primary focus now is on enhancement. Things that make life better, but not necessarily things that are basic needs. You know how nostalgia goes. You always think the good old days were good, but I can't say that I like or dislike the change. I just realize that it is what it is. But I can tell you, I remember the old shops more than I remember the ones that come and go now. No offense to the ones that are down there now, but if you're getting what you need as opposed to what you might want, you're going to remember because you go there often.
The biggest change I've seen in the industrial community, and it was happening when I came to Ripon, or moved back to Ripon in 1990, but that was the sale, the ownership change from being locally owned to more corporate owned, and I think that's had an effect on the community. The good side of it is that it's created, I think, perhaps more stability. We've had, the companies have been here a long time because their parent companies are reasonably healthy and stable. The drawback, of course, locally is that because you don't have local ownership, you don't have local buy-in, and that has had an effect, I think, on charity and the giving to local causes, including the United Way. Not that companies don't do great things, but they do them maybe on more of a national scale, or they do them to fit their own agenda, their national agenda, which may have an effect locally, which is great. But in terms of being team players and recognizing we are all one as one community, that doesn't exist like it used to, given the change of ownership. Retail-wise, I think like downtowns in middle America all over the country, we had become more of a specialized boutique downtown with fewer anchors, because the anchors that would tend to be retail stores or certainly grocers, and we had, when I grew up here, we had 2 grocery stores that I can recall downtown, but they've all tended to move out to the strip area, which in Ripon is, of course, the west side largely. So that's created an opportunity too, and that downtown has become more of a, I think, interesting spot for tourists, given the mix of restaurants and specialty shops and services. A couple classical examples would be our largest employer, which formerly was Speed Queen and then was purchased by Raytheon and since has had about 5 different owners. But they continue to play the most important role they can in Ripon, and that is to be a major employer to provide for the livelihoods of many people. So that's most important. And we're appreciative not only of their existence, but of their continued growth. We are so lucky to have Alliance. Ripon Foods, the Bumby family, of course, started and operated it until, I don't know when it was purchased by Bremner, which has since sold to ConAgra. But when the Bumby family got out of it, of course, a little bit of Ripon died, in the sense that the Bumbys were so generous with Ripon, and more generous than we could have ever have expected, but that's changed. But the good news is we continue to have a viable cookie factory again, which provides jobs, which provides property tax revenue, and which does provide some wonderful community gifts. So no complaints, just that things have changed in Ripon as they have nationally. Of course, because of the vision of Ripon's forefathers and mothers, we have a very viable business or industrial park, which has now expanded into a business park, and that's provided necessary room for physical expansion of our industry. And we know of the blue chip ones, what we called creative forming at one time, and what had been Admanco, which is no longer around. And now Alliance Laundry Systems has a facility out there. But there are other smaller companies, less well known, but they're an important part of our industrial base. And they would include Ripon Pickle and Stainless Flow and Modern Overhead Door. And there are others like that that are low key, but again, are very important players in this town.
Ripon Main Street is a downtown revitalization program that's been in existence since 1988. Ripon was one of the first 5 communities selected by the Wisconsin Department of Commerce in '88, and we've been going strong ever since. Ripon Main Street Incorporated is affiliated with the Wisconsin Main Street program, which is run by now it's run by the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, and we're also tied in with the National Main Street program that's now out of Chicago. So kind of a multi-layer program that provides a lot of assistance, in-kind assistance, or nothing financial, but a lot of training and that kind of stuff for Ripon. Back when the program started in 1988, the vacancy rate was roughly 26%. And over the years, we've been able to chip away at that. Vacancy rate obviously spiked a little bit since the 2008 recession and with one of the problems we've been dealing with downtown. But all in all, we've been having a lot of success again recently with helping to fill storefronts and help businesses start up. That's a big part of my job. The other part is working with property owners to revitalize their buildings and spruce up their buildings, which hopefully improves the tax base and then also helps the entire community contribute more to the tax base. Ripon Main Street does a couple projects maybe every other year or so. Everything from buying property. Back in 1995, we bought the Pratt building, bought a building that was in disrepair, fixed it up, put it back on the market. We bought the building that we're currently housed in with the Chamber and Main Street at 114 Scott Street, another building that people had said should have been torn down. We brought it back to life and put it back in the tax rolls, and it's now contributing positively in terms of the tax revenue that's paid. Ripon Main Street has also done projects. We established the Village Green and the bandstand. That was another project. We've helped property owners renovate their buildings. Most recently, one of the most significant renovations was the renovation of 204, 206, and 208 Watson. That created two beautiful apartments. So we help property owners renovate their buildings. We help property owners recruit businesses. We help property owners facilitate the sale of buildings. Sometimes it's through retirement or other project or processes, but whatever it takes to try and make the downtown better, more economically prosperous is what we do. Currently, our vacancy rate is a little bit higher if you factor in the properties that are currently owned by Boca. That's going through a legal process. If or when that's straightened out, Main Street will be able to offer assistance to those new property owners. So it's just a matter of we've helped people in the past, we'll help people in the future, and it's just a matter of dealing with that when the opportunity arises. One of the major activities that happened downtown was the December 11th, 2013 fire that destroyed 2 storefronts and heavily damaged the 2 adjacent buildings. So the 310 and 312 Watson buildings were completely destroyed, and those were torn down in July. Now it's a matter of rebuilding the buildings that were damaged and figuring out what we can do with that vacant space that's currently owned by Boca, and hopefully that'll transition in 5-6 months, and we'll move on from there.
We've heard a number of stories about the fire on Watson Street and about people's astonishing response to it, that not only were the people in Ripon unusually generous in the estimation of outsiders, but had quickly and effectively organized particularly relief efforts to help the people who were hurt by the fire. So I think that is our historic character, that we are active citizens and idealistic, and it shows in our actions throughout our history.
Now we work a lot to not only recruit businesses but also cluster businesses. So establishing a retail base is critical to keeping the revitalization program moving forward. We need to have a certain number of retailers to make it a destination. 20, 30 years ago, Ripon, I don't think, was actually a destination in terms of tourists coming here to shop. Now we have a lot of niche businesses. We have furniture stores, we have clothing stores, but at the same time, it's also important to continue to keep the staples, keeping the drugstore, keeping the dental clinic, the eye clinic, the tax prep people. Those things, the downtown, if it's going to be successful, needs to be a lifestyle center where you can walk out your door and get anything you need without having to get in your vehicle. So we could try and fill every storefront with a retail boutique business, but when you hit a recession, especially a major recession, it's going to it'd be extremely difficult to overcome those challenges. So I think if we're going to have a population base that's going to be living downtown or living near the downtown, you need to have things that they can purchase versus having to get in their vehicle and drive to a different community or drive someplace else to purchase. Ripon Main Street works with a couple different segments. The Main Street program, the National Main Street program, has 4 components: design, organization, promotion, and economic development, of which promotion is probably the most visible activity that Main Street coordinates. So whether it's the Friday night concerts, assisting with Dickens of a Christmas, helping the Chamber, September Fest. So there's a lot of things, and it takes roughly, they always say it takes 7 to 10 years to establish an event. And now that a lot of our activities are approaching the 20-year threshold is when we can actually start to tweak them and build them. So this year, 2014, Dickens was extremely successful, had crowds. The weather helped, but crowds much larger than anything we've ever had before. The concerts are attended well on a weekly basis, and it's no longer people coming down just for a certain kind of music. People come down now to socialize and engage with family and friends and neighbors and that kind of thing. So it contributes to what makes Ripon unique. And hopefully if somebody's thinking about moving or relocating, and hopefully those kinds of activities are the tipping point and make somebody choose Ripon versus choosing someplace else. The other thing the other major component of the Main Street program is design. And over the years, we've worked with numerous property owners to renovate their buildings, not only to make them look better. If they look better, hopefully they rent quicker, hopefully they have higher rent values, and hopefully they sell quicker. So if they have higher values, they contribute more to the tax base. So that's the whole economic return to the community is very important. It's a vital component of what Main Street does. And over the years, on an annual basis, we might only be working with 1 or 2 building renovations, but by the time you add all of those renovations over 1 or 2 decades, the people who really notice those changes are the people who are from out of town who come here and visit either for alumni weekend or reunions and that kind of thing. So sometimes they mention that people don't see the forest for the trees, but when you come in and you look at it 3, 4, 5 years, 7 years removed, there's a huge difference in what the community looks like now versus what it looked like in '92.
Another change that's happened in Ripon in the last 25 years, although it began a bit earlier, is what we might be calling the professionalization of the leadership of the community. We earlier had essentially amateur leadership of the community by what you might call founding or town fathers, and they were fathers. But in the 70s and 80s, we moved into more professional management with a city manager in particular, but then also a Main Street coordinator and a paid staff for the Chamber of Commerce, and so that the management has become more professionalized. On a different plane, women's roles in Ripon have changed enormously in this period of time. In the 50s and 60s, there was, we might call it the golden age of women's groups. The AAUW, the Ripon Women's Club, and others were extremely active volunteer organizations of women who were active in support of various projects in this town. This historical society would be nowhere, in fact, if it weren't for various women's groups. Most of the restoration in this society, the restoration of our various buildings, our various rooms in our homes, were undertaken by women's groups. This began to change in the 80s as opportunities for women to work outside the home increased, and as their ability to perform leadership roles increased. In 1989, in fact, for instance, Rotary began to accept women in its ranks. At Kiwanis began to accept women, and women became more active in those groups and began more entrepreneurial operations on their own. As they did so, of course, their interest in the volunteer activities declined, so that women now are more integrated, far more integrated in the everyday economic life of Ripon and into its leadership roles. Another change has been the growth of our Hispanic population. For a while, Ripon's experience with Hispanic population only came during the summer when migrant workers came to work in the in PPAC and in the corn pack. But as with the nation, so too with Ripon, more and more Hispanic people began moving into our community on a permanent basis, so that they became, over time, one of the two fastest growing segments of our population, and created new challenges, but also new opportunities, and created a more multicultural society, which I think has been beneficial.
Thank you from the bottom of my heart to everybody that helps out. I extremely appreciate it, and I love you all.
Thank you so much.
Ripon Medical Center is proud to bring this exceptional new facility to you all and to the communities that we serve. We've been on this thrilling journey together, first seeking careful input from our businesses, from our community leaders, from our citizens, and from our own team members, to now fulfilling the dream to have a state-of-the-art facility right here in Ripon. What an exciting time for our history.
Thank you for your partnership with the City of Ripon. I couldn't be happier about what this brings to this community. So really, today, this is about you as Ripon residents and community celebrating something that you've been needing for a number of years. Bricks and mortar do not bring better health care. We can build the fanciest buildings in the world, but that's not going to lead you to better health. But what's going to lead you to better health is facilities that welcome some of the best providers in the country and the best environment that we can to heal in, and that's what this does. It may seem opulent in some ways, but this facility is here for the next 100 years. And we wanted to give you something that you could be proud of, that you could represent to other communities of what it means to you. Ripon has it going. I've said this from day one. You got a college that's about ready to invest 50-some million plus. You've got a school district who has embraced new facilities projects, and while always difficult using tax dollars to pay for, you're moving forward. You have vibrant healthcare. You have a city that's embracing some changes in their downtown to make it more vibrant. I don't think there's ever been, and I saw an editorial in the Ripon Commonwealth, the citizen brought forward to say, you know what, this is probably one of the most exciting times in the recent history of Ripon, given all the things that are occurring, and I firmly believe that.
We know that individuals and families in the Ripon area prefer to receive their health care locally. That's why we are working diligently to bring as many services to you all here locally in our community as possible.
1, 2, 3, cut away.
We feel privileged to have lived in Ripon and to have raised our family in Ripon. We came here with no children, and all 3 children were born at Ripon Medical Center. And I think that gets at why we feel so lucky to be here, because we have fine healthcare facilities. The schools are terrific, and that means we've got top-notch teachers. Because you get to know them personally in a town the size of Ripon, and you realize how committed they are to their profession and to the well-being of your children and of the community.
Initially, I'd never intended to stay in Ripon. I thought maybe 2 or 3 years, go off and go on to greener pastures. But you know, Ripon's a great place to raise a family. I used to joke that it's like living in Mayberry, but it's cool. Everybody knows everybody, and everybody looks out for everybody, and that grows on you over the years. To be honest, I couldn't imagine living any other place. We have an old Victorian house, so we like that historic aspect of the community and the charm, but it's certainly there's much more to it than just history. It's the close, cohesive nature that Riponites have for one another.
As the people of Ripon embrace the challenges of the 21st century, The spirit of those pragmatic idealists who founded the Ceresco Commune, the city of Ripon, the anti-slavery Republican Party, Ripon College, the League of Women Voters, and several other influential organizations lives on in this small city with a very big history.